The wind howls through skeletal buildings. Snow drifts over rubble and steel. In the frozen wasteland that was once Stalingrad, silence is a weapon. 2 rifles, 2 scopes, 2 men hunting each other through the ruins of a dying city. One is a shepherd from the Ural Mountains, thrust into history by necessity and skill. The other, a master marksman sent from Berlin with a single mission: kill the man who has become a Soviet legend. For days they wait. They watch. They barely breathe in the winter of 1942. Amid the greatest battle of the Second World War, these 2 snipers wage their own private conflict. A duel measured in hours of stillness and fractions of seconds of violence. 1 bullet, 1 life, 1 outcome that would echo through history. This is the story of the deadliest sniper duel of World War II. A story of patience and terror, of myth and reality, of 2 men who became symbols of something far larger than themselves. This is Stalingrad, and this is how legends are born. August 23rd, 1942. The German Luftwaffe unleashes hell on Stalingrad. Over 600 aircraft drop thousands of tons of bombs on the city. Firestorms consume entire neighborhoods. The Volga River runs with ash. Within hours, 40,000 civilians are dead. The city that bears Stalin's name is being systematically destroyed. But this is more than destruction for destruction's sake. This is strategy. This is desperation. This is the Wehrmacht's attempt to break the Soviet Union. Once and for all, Stalingrad sits on the western bank of the Volga River, the great artery that carries oil and supplies from the Caucasus to the Soviet war machine. Control this city, and you control the lifeline of the Red Army. Capture it, and you open the door to the oil fields beyond. For Adolf Hitler, Stalingrad has become an obsession. The city bears his enemy's name. Taking it would be both a strategic victory and a symbolic humiliation. He has ordered the Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, to seize the city at any cost. For Joseph Stalin, retreat is unthinkable. Order number 227 is clear: not 1 step back. Soldiers who flee will be shot. Commanders who allow retreat will be executed. Stalingrad will be held, or it will become a mass grave. By September, the city has been transformed into something from a nightmare. Buildings reduced to jagged concrete shells. Streets buried under debris. Factories still operating even as battles rage inside them. The Soviets employ a tactic called hugging the enemy. They stay so close to German lines that the Luftwaffe cannot bomb without hitting their own troops. Combat becomes intimate, brutal, room to room, floor to floor, sometimes hand to hand. In this environment, conventional warfare breaks down. Artillery is too imprecise. Tanks cannot navigate the rubble. Infantry charges are suicide. This is where the sniper becomes King. In the ruins of Stalingrad, a man with a rifle and patience can control entire city blocks, can paralyze enemy movements, can kill officers and break morale with a single, well-placed shot. And among the Soviet snipers emerging in this hellscape, one name begins to spread, whispered among German troops with fear, celebrated in Soviet propaganda with reverence: Vasily Zaitsev, Vasily Grigorievich. Zaitsev was born in 1915 in the village of Yeleninskoye in the Ural Mountains. His childhood was spent in the wilderness, hunting, tracking, learning to read the forest, and the behavior of animals. His grandfather taught him to shoot, not with military precision, but with the instincts of a hunter, patience, observation, the understanding that a good shot comes not from speed, but from stillness. By the time he was 12, Zaitsev could track a deer through snow for hours, could wait motionless in freezing temperatures for the perfect moment, could fire once and bring down his target without a second shot. These skills, learned in the forests of Siberia, would make him one of the most feared soldiers in the Soviet army. When war came, Zaitsev was serving in the Soviet Navy, assigned to the Pacific Fleet. But as the situation in Stalingrad grew desperate, the call went out for reinforcements. Entire divisions were stripped from the east and sent west. In September 1942, Zaitsev arrived in Stalingrad as part of the 1047th Rifle Regiment, 284th Rifle Division. He was 27 years old, a sailor with a hunter's instincts thrown into the greatest urban battle in history. What he saw must have been overwhelming. The city was unrecognizable. Entire blocks were leveled. Bodies lay frozen in the streets. The air smelled of smoke, cordite, and death. But Zaitsev adapted, because what the Red Army needed desperately in Stalingrad was not grand strategy or overwhelming force. It needed men who could kill Germans efficiently, quietly, and consistently. It needed snipers. Zaitsev's first confirmed kill came within days of his arrival. A German officer, visible for only seconds through a gap in the rubble. One shot. Clean. Fatal. Then another. And another. Within weeks, Zaitsev had killed dozens of German soldiers. His reputation grew. Soviet commanders began to notice. Journalists embedded with the troops began to write about him, but more importantly, German soldiers began to fear him. In the claustrophobic nightmare of Stalingrad, fear is a force multiplier. Soldiers who are afraid move differently, hesitate, make mistakes. A sniper who instills fear is worth more than a dozen ordinary riflemen. And Zaitsev understood this. He didn't just kill. He terrorized. He would leave German corpses in visible positions, forcing their comrades to risk exposure to recover the bodies. He would target officers specifically, decapitating command structures. He would shoot at the same times each day, creating patterns that made German troops paranoid about any movement during those hours. By October 1942, Vasily Zaitsev had become more than a soldier. He had become a symbol. The Soviet propaganda machine seized on him. Articles appeared in Red Army newspapers. His kill count was announced and celebrated. He was presented as the ideal Soviet warrior. Humble origins, deadly skill, unwavering loyalty. But propaganda, however useful, creates problems. Because when you turn a man into a legend, you make him a target. And the Germans were paying attention. In the ruins of Stalingrad, a new kind of warfare had evolved. Not the clash of armies, but a silent, lethal game of patience played by men with scoped rifles. The rubble provided perfect conditions for snipers. Buildings with collapsed walls created natural hide sites. Destroyed factories offered countless angles and positions. The maze of debris made it nearly impossible to predict where a shot might come from. Soviet snipers operated in pairs or small teams. A shooter and a spotter, sometimes a third man for security. They would move before dawn, position themselves in carefully selected locations, and wait. Hours could pass without a shot. Days even. The art of sniping in Stalingrad was not marksmanship alone. It was fieldcraft, camouflage, discipline, the ability to remain absolutely still while cold gnawed at your bones and your bladder, screamed for relief. Zaitsev excelled at this. His hunting background had taught him to think like prey, to anticipate behavior, to understand that a good position was more valuable than a good shot. He developed techniques that became standard practice for Soviet snipers. He studied German patterns, learned their routines, identified times when soldiers grew careless, early morning, during meals, after dark when they believed themselves safe. He used decoys, helmets on sticks, dummy positions, anything to draw German fire and reveal enemy sniper locations, and he taught others. Recognizing the value of skilled marksmen, Soviet command established sniper schools within Stalingrad itself. Zaitsev became an instructor. He trained dozens of soldiers in the art of the kill. His students became known as izeketa, little rabbits, a reference to Zaitsev's name, which means hare. These snipers spread throughout the city, each one a threat, each one contributing to the psychological pressure on German troops. But the Germans were not passive victims. They had their own snipers, skilled marksmen drawn from mountain troops, from hunting clubs, from the SS men who understood long-range killing and had no shortage of courage. The ruins of Stalingrad became a chessboard. Sniper hunting sniper, each side trying to outthink, outpatient, outlast the other. German snipers began targeting Soviet officers and political commissars. Soviet snipers responded by targeting anyone who appeared to give orders. The kill counts on both sides climbed dot, and then, according to legend, Berlin decided to send someone special. Someone who could end the Vasily Zaitsev problem permanently. His name, it was said, was Erwin König, or perhaps Heinz Thorwald. The historical record is unclear, which is part of what makes this story both fascinating and frustrating. What we know from Soviet sources is this. In late October or early November 1942, word spread among Soviet snipers that a German master marksman had arrived in Stalingrad. An expert, possibly from the Zossen Sniper School near Berlin, possibly SS, a man sent specifically to kill Vasily Zaitsev. Zaitsev himself described this in his memoirs, published after the war. He called his opponent the head of the Berlin Sniper School, a man of exceptional skill who had hunted in the mountains and knew the craft intimately. German records, however, contain no mention of such a man. No Erwin König, no special sniper sent to Stalingrad, no mission orders, no confirmation. This creates a problem for historians. Is the duel a fabrication? Soviet propaganda designed to further elevate Zaitsev? Or is it real, but poorly documented due to wartime chaos and the destruction of records? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. There were certainly skilled German snipers in Stalingrad. Several SS divisions were present, and the SS maintained rigorous marksmanship training. It's entirely plausible that a particularly skilled German sniper operated in Zaitsev's sector. Whether he was specifically sent to kill Zaitsev, whether his name was König, whether the duel unfolded exactly as described, these are questions we may never definitively answer. But the story that emerged from Stalingrad is this: for several days in November 1942, Vasily Zaitsev engaged in a deadly cat-and-mouse game with a German sniper of exceptional skill, a man who understood the game as well as Zaitsev did, who could anticipate his moves, who hunted him as carefully as he hunted others. This is the duel. And this is how it's said to have unfolded. Day 1, November 9th, perhaps, or slightly earlier. The exact date is lost to history. Zaitsev and his spotter, Nikolai Kulikov, are operating in the factory district. The massive Lazur chemical plant, reduced to a skeleton of twisted metal and shattered concrete. Perfect sniper country. They've been hunting for days without incident. Several kills. German soldiers growing careless in what they thought were safe areas. But today, something is different. Kulikov spots movement. A German soldier exposed for just a moment. Zaitsev lines up the shot, begins to squeeze the trigger, and then hesitates. Something feels wrong. The exposure is too perfect, too convenient. He doesn't fire. They wait. Minutes pass. Then, from a position 30 meters away, a shot cracks. A Soviet soldier, walking carelessly through an area Zaitsev's team had just crossed, drops dead. Headshot. Zaitsev realizes immediately. Someone is hunting them. Someone good enough to set a trap. Someone patient enough to wait for the right target. He and Kulikov pull back without firing. Reposition. Begin to think differently. This is no longer about finding German soldiers. This is about finding one specific German, a hunter who is hunting him. Day 2, they change their approach. Instead of moving to active positions, they focus on observation, studying the rubble, looking for signs, disturbed dust, unnatural shadows, anything that might indicate a hide site. The German, whoever he is equally careful. No movement, no reflection off a scope, no amateur mistakes. Zaitsev begins to think about the psychology of his opponent. Where would a skilled sniper position himself in this sector? What angles offer the best field of fire? What positions are too obvious and therefore suspect? He narrows it down to 3 possible locations: a collapsed water tower, a partially standing wall with window frames, a pile of rubble near a destroyed tank. But which one? And how to confirm without exposing himself? Day 3. Zaitsev and Kulikov employ a classic sniper tactic, the decoy. They construct a crude mannequin using a helmet and jacket mounted on a stick. They position it carefully in an area visible from the 3 suspected locations. Then they wait. Hours. The cold is vicious. The urge to move, to stretch frozen muscles, is almost unbearable. But they remain motionless. And then movement. Not a shot, but a glint. A brief reflection, possibly off a scope, possibly from the area near the destroyed tank, possibly nothing, but possibly everything. Zaitsev makes a note of the position. They pull back as darkness falls. Day 4. A new plan. Instead of positioning themselves directly, Zaitsev and Kulikov arrive before dawn and set up in a location with a view of the suspected German position. They don't move, don't adjust. They become part of the landscape, breathing slowly, blinking rarely, the discipline of absolute stillness, and they wait. Hours pass. The sun rises, flooding the ruins with pale autumn light. German soldiers move in the distance. But Zaitsev ignores them. He's not hunting soldiers today. He's hunting one man. Then, in the early afternoon, it happens. A piece of sheet metal near the destroyed tank shifts slightly, so slightly that most observers would miss it. But Kulikov catches it. He signals Zaitsev. They watch. Minutes later, a helmet appears, barely visible, just the crown rising slightly above cover. Zaitsev doesn't fire, because that's what the German wants. That's the trap. Shoot at the decoy, reveal your position, and die seconds later when the real shot comes. Instead, Zaitsev continues to wait. And watch. Day 5. Zaitsev employs a different approach. He brings in another sniper, a student from his school. The plan is to create a distraction, draw the Germans' attention while Zaitsev repositions. They move into the sector from different angles. The other sniper makes deliberate, visible movements in one area, not careless, but noticeable to a trained observer. While the Germans' attention is presumably drawn that direction, Zaitsev and Kulikov slip into a new position, closer to the destroyed tank, an elevated spot on rubble that offers a narrow angle. From this position, they have a view of the space behind the sheet metal. It's not a perfect angle. The German is well hidden, but there's a gap, a small opening through which, if the German shifts his weight or adjusts his rifle, he might become visible. They settle in. Begin another wait. Hours pass. The distraction sniper fires twice at distant targets. Not the German, just maintaining the illusion of normal operations. And then, as the sun begins to descend, creating long shadows across the rubble, the German moves. It's a tiny adjustment, shifting position to accommodate the changing light. But it exposes him, just barely, just enough. Through the scope, Zaitsev sees it. A sliver of uniform, part of a shoulder, the edge of a head. He begins to apply pressure to the trigger. Slowly, the technique his grandfather taught him. Steady, no jerk. The rifle must fire as if by surprise. The shot cracks across the ruins. And in the distance, through the scope, Zaitsev sees the German jerk. Fall. The duel is over. According to Zaitsev's account, they confirmed the kill the following morning. Moving carefully to the German position, they found the body. A major, based on his insignia. His rifle, a Mauser Carabiner 98K with a telescopic sight, was still in place. In Zaitsev's memoir, published in the 1950s, he described finding documents on the body identifying the man as the head of a sniper school in Zossen. Erwin König, Soviet propaganda, celebrated the kill. Articles appeared in Red Army newspapers. Zaitsev's fame, already considerable, became legendary. He had defeated the best the Germans could send. The story spread through Soviet ranks. Morale, always crucial in Stalingrad's desperate fighting, received a boost. If Zaitsev could kill Germany's best sniper, then perhaps the Red Army could win this battle. Perhaps Stalingrad could be held? But historians examining German records after the war found something troubling. No record of Erwin König, no sniper school at Zossen that matched the description, no documentation of such a mission. Several theories have emerged to explain this discrepancy. The records may have been destroyed in the war. The operation may have been so classified that it left no paper trail. The name may have been wrong or misremembered. or the story may have been embellished, not fabricated entirely, but enhanced. A skilled German sniper existed. Zaitsev killed him, and Soviet propaganda elaborated the details to create a more compelling narrative. What cannot be disputed is this: Vasily Zaitsev was a real soldier who killed a confirmed 225 German soldiers during the Battle of Stalingrad, most of them with single shots through the head or heart. His contribution to Soviet defense of the city was significant and recognized by military command. Whether his greatest achievement was defeating one specific German sniper or simply surviving and killing effectively in the worst urban combat of the war may be less important than what he represented. Hope, skill, the possibility that individual courage and ability could matter even in a conflict measured in hundreds of thousands of casualties. And that is what made Vasily Zaitsev a legend. The Battle of Stalingrad continued for months after Zaitsev's alleged duel with König through November, through December, into the brutal winter of 1942-1943. In January, Zaitsev was severely wounded. A mortar shell exploded near his position, and shrapnel tore into his eyes. He was evacuated across the Volga, operated on by the famous Soviet eye surgeon Vladimir Filatov, and spent months recovering in Moscow. He would regain much of his vision, but his days as a front-line sniper were over. He returned to duty later in the war, but in different capacities. Meanwhile, Stalingrad ground toward its conclusion. The German Sixth Army, surrounded and starving, fought with increasing desperation. Hitler refused to allow retreat. General Paulus pleaded for permission to break out. Permission was denied. On February 2, 1943, the remaining German forces in Stalingrad surrendered. Of the 300,000 German soldiers who had entered the city, fewer than 6,000 would ever return home. The rest were killed in battle or died in Soviet captivity. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. It was the first major defeat of a German army. It broke the myth of Wehrmacht invincibility. It shifted the momentum of the entire Eastern Front. And in the midst of that vast historical turning point, the story of Vasily Zaitsev and his duel with a German master sniper became one of the defining narratives of the battle. After the war, Zaitsev returned to civilian life. He worked in a factory in Kiev, married, raised a family. He wrote his memoirs, which were published in the Soviet Union in the 1950s and later translated into multiple languages. The memoir, Notes of a Sniper, described his experiences in Stalingrad, including the duel. It's from this source that most of what we know about Neg comes. Zaitsev's description is detailed but not overly dramatic. He presents it as another difficult hunt, more challenging than most, but ultimately just part of his work in the city. Soviet authorities embraced the story. It became part of official history. Textbooks included it. Military academies taught it as an example of superior Soviet tactics and courage. In the West, the story was largely unknown until after the Cold War, when Soviet archives began to open and memoirs were translated. Historians encountered the tale with fascination and skepticism. The 2001 film Enemy at the Gates, directed by Jean-Jacques Annaud, brought the story to a global audience. The film dramatized Zaitsev's experiences, including the duel with a German sniper named Major König, played by Ed Harris. The film took considerable liberties with history. It added a love triangle, simplified complex political dynamics, and presented the duel in more cinematic terms than Zaitsev's own account suggested. But it did something important. It introduced millions of people to the story of Vasily Zaitsev and the sniper war at Stalingrad. It sparked renewed interest in this aspect of World War II history, and it reignited debate among historians about whether the duel actually happened. Vasily Zaitsev died on December 15, 1991, just days before the Soviet Union itself dissolved. He was 76 years old. He had outlived the country he fought for, the ideology that shaped his youth, and most of the men who fought beside him in Stalingrad. In 2006, his remains were reburied in Volgograd, the city formerly known as Stalingrad. The ceremony was attended by veterans and dignitaries. His grave overlooks Mamayev Kurgan, the hill that saw some of the bloodiest fighting of the entire battle. A fitting resting place for a man who became inseparable from the city's legend. So what do we make of the story? What do we make of the duel with Erwin König? The truth is probably this: the broad strokes are accurate. Zaitsev was a real sniper with a real record. There were skilled German snipers operating in Stalingrad. A prolonged engagement between Zaitsev and one such sniper likely occurred. The details, the name, Neg, the exact methods, the day-by-day progression, these may be less reliable. Memory is imperfect. War memoirs are often embellished, consciously or unconsciously. Soviet propaganda had motives to enhance certain stories. But does that make the story false, or merely uncertain? Perhaps the better question is, does it matter? Because what the story of Vasily Zaitsev represents transcends the specific facts of any single duel. It represents the reality that in the midst of vast, mechanized warfare, individual skill and courage still mattered. It represents the psychological dimension of combat, the way fear and hope, morale and determination can be as important as tanks and artillery. It represents the human scale of a conflict so large it threatens to become incomprehensible. 2 men, 2 rifles, a contest measured in patience and precision while hundreds of thousands died around them. That story resonates because it's graspable. We can imagine it. We can feel the tension. We can understand the stakes. And so the legend endures, passed down, told and retold, each generation discovering it anew and asking the same questions. Was it real? Did it happen this way? Does the truth matter as much as the story? Perhaps the greatest legacy of Vasily Zaitsev is not the number of men he killed or even the duel that made him famous. Perhaps it's this: he gave human form to the sacrifice and skill of the Soviet soldiers who held Stalingrad when it should have fallen. He became a symbol. Symbols are more powerful than facts. They endure longer. They shape how we remember and understand history. And in the ruins of Stalingrad, where the greatest battle of the deadliest war in human history was decided, symbols mattered. Hope mattered. The belief that courage and skill could turn the tide mattered. Vasily Zaitsev provided that. Whether every detail of his story is historically verifiable becomes secondary to what he represented then and represents now. a man who went into hell and came out a legend. In the winter of 1942, Stalingrad was a graveyard, a frozen nightmare of rubble and death where hundreds of thousands of men fought and died for control of a city that barely existed anymore. In that environment, two snipers are said to have hunted each other for days, with patience and skill that transcended normal human limits. One was a shepherd from the Urals who had learned to hunt in the forests of Siberia. The other, a German marksman whose name and identity remain uncertain, sent to end the legend that was growing around his enemy. They stalked each other through ruins, set traps, employed decoys, waited in frozen silence for the one moment, the one shot that would end it. And in the end, one walked away. The other did not. The story has been told countless times, in books, in films, in the memoirs of veterans and the lectures of historians, each telling slightly different, each emphasizing different aspects. But at its core, the story remains the same. Two men, one city, a duel that has become legend. Whether every detail is true hardly matters anymore. What matters is that in the midst of industrialized slaughter, in a battle where individual lives seemed meaningless against the scale of destruction, this story reminds us that individuals still mattered, that skill and courage and determination could still make a difference, that one person with the right abilities and the will to use them could become something more than just another casualty. Vasily Zaitsev survived Stalingrad. He survived the war. He lived to see the Soviet Union's triumph, its long Cold War standoff, and finally its collapse. And throughout all of that, his story endured. The sniper from Stalingrad, the man who killed Germany's best in a duel among the ruins, real or embellished, fact or myth. In the end, it's a story about what humans are capable of when pushed to extremes, about the nature of warfare, about how legends are born from blood and desperation. The ruins of Stalingrad are gone now. The city was rebuilt, renamed Volgograd. Modern buildings stand where factories once burned. Parks exist where soldiers once died by the thousands. But the memory remains in monuments, in museums, in the stories passed down through generations. And at the center of those stories, among the many acts of courage and sacrifice that define the battle, one tale stands out. The duel, the sniper war, Vasily Zaitsev versus Erwin, König. Two men who may or may not have been exactly as described, who fought exactly as recounted, or perhaps somewhat differently, but whose story has become inseparable from the legend of Stalingrad itself. In war, truth and myth become entangled. What happened blurs with what people needed to believe happened. Heroes emerge not just from their actions, but from how those actions are remembered and retold. Vasily Zaitsev was a hero, a skilled soldier who killed effectively and helped hold a critical city. Whether the duel with König happened exactly as described doesn't diminish that, because in the end, what the story teaches us is not about marksmanship or tactics. It's about the human capacity to endure, to fight with intelligence and patience even when surrounded by chaos, to maintain discipline and skill even in conditions that should break any person. That is the real legacy of the sniper duel at Stalingrad. Not who fired what shot when, but what it represents about the human spirit under extreme duress, the deadliest sniper duel of World War II. Perhaps it happened exactly as told. Perhaps the details shifted over time. Perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. But the story endures, and that, in the end, may be the most important truth of all. Two men, one city in ruins. A legend born from silence and snow and the patience of predators. This was Stalingrad. This was 1942. This was the duel. And this is how we remember. Asterisk, but memory is complex. And the story of Vasily Zaitsev extends beyond that single duel. Beyond even the Battle of Stalingrad itself, to understand the full significance of what happened in those ruins, we need to look deeper at the nature of sniper warfare, at the psychological impact these lone hunters had on both sides, and at the other men and women who fought the same silent war in the frozen hellscape of Stalingrad, because Zaitsev was not alone. He was simply the most famous. The Soviet sniper program in Stalingrad was systematic and deadly. By late 1942, there were estimated to be more than 1,000 trained snipers operating in the city. Men and women, because the Red Army deployed female snipers in numbers no other nation matched. Lyudmila Pavlyuchenko, though she fought primarily in the siege of Odessa and Sevastopol, became the most successful female sniper in history with 309 confirmed kills. Her success inspired the deployment of more women as markswomen in Stalingrad itself. Female snipers like Tanya Chernova operated alongside their male counterparts. Chernova, who claimed to have trained under Zaitsev himself, reportedly killed more than 24 German soldiers before being wounded and evacuated. These women faced the same conditions as the men. The same cold, the same hunger, the same constant proximity to death, and they killed with the same efficiency. The Germans, initially dismissive of Soviet snipers, learned to fear them. Reports from German soldiers describe the psychological toll of knowing that any movement, any exposure, could result in sudden death. One German account from a soldier of the 389th Infantry Division describes the terror. You cannot see them. You hear only the crack of the rifle, and then your comrade falls. Sometimes he dies instantly. Sometimes he screams, and you know that if you move to help him, you will be next. This fear changed behavior. German soldiers moved differently in Stalingrad than they did in open field warfare. They hunched. They ran in short bursts. They avoided standing upright. They learned to use cover instinctively, but the snipers adapted. They studied these new patterns. They learned where soldiers felt safe and targeted those areas. They created zones of death where no movement was possible during daylight hours. The psychological warfare extended beyond the killing itself. Soviet snipers would sometimes wound rather than kill, knowing that wounded soldiers required medical attention and evacuation, tying up resources and creating additional targets. They would target specific individuals repeatedly, creating the impression of being personally hunted. German officers became reluctant to display their rank insignia, knowing it made them priority targets, and they used sound. The crack of a Mosin-Nagant rifle became associated with death. German soldiers learned to recognize the distinctive sound and would freeze or dive for cover at the noise. Even if the shot wasn't aimed at them, This is the broader context of Zaitsev's work. He was the most famous, the most celebrated, but he was part of a system, a deliberate Soviet strategy to use snipers not just as soldiers, but as instruments of terror and demoralization. And it worked. The training program Zaitsev established became a model. His students, the Zaikata, spread his techniques throughout Soviet sniper units. Methods he had learned hunting in Siberia became standard Red Army doctrine. One of his key teachings was patience. He would tell his students that a good sniper might wait an entire day for a single shot, that the willingness to not shoot, to let targets pass while waiting for a better one, was more important than marksmanship skill. He taught them to think like hunters, not soldiers, to study their prey, to learn patterns and habits, to understand that human beings are creatures of routine, and routine creates vulnerability. He taught them about hide construction, how to blend with rubble, how to use debris and shadow to become invisible, how to enter and exit positions without leaving traces. He taught them about teamwork, the relationship between sniper and spotter, how two sets of eyes see more than one, how dividing responsibilities, one watches the target, one watches for threats, keeps both men alive. And he taught them about mental discipline, how to control breathing and heartbeat, how to ignore cold and hunger and fear, how to exist in a state of relaxed alertness for hours at a time. These lessons saved lives. Zaitsev's students went on to kill hundreds of German soldiers. Some, like Viktor Medvedev and Anatoly Chekhov, became accomplished snipers in their own right. Chekhov, in fact, was with Zaitsev during the alleged duel with König. He served as spotter and security. His account, published years later, corroborates Zaitsev's version of events, though with some minor differences in detail. Whether Chekhov's testimony proves the duel happened as described, or simply shows that both men remembered the same propaganda story, is open to interpretation. But it does establish that Zaitsev did not fight entirely alone. He had support. He had fellow hunters who shared the burden and the danger. The German response to Soviet sniper dominance evolved over time. Initially, they relied on their own trained marksman Scharfschützen drawn from mountain troops and specialized units. These men were skilled, but they were trained for different conditions. Open terrain, mountain warfare, engagements at extreme range. Stalingrad's close-quarters urban environment required different tactics. German snipers began to adapt. They learned from their Soviet counterparts. They began using similar camouflage techniques. They started working in pairs. They studied the rubble and found positions that offered concealment and clear fields of fire. Some German snipers achieved considerable success. SS Oberscharfer Matthias Hetzenauer, though he fought primarily on other fronts, was credited with 345 confirmed kills by war's end. Joseph Sepp Allerberger claimed 257 kills. These men were professionals, every bit as skilled as their Soviet counterparts. In Stalingrad specifically, German sniper Erwin Vasily reportedly killed 103 Soviet soldiers before being killed himself. Heinz Thorvald, one of the names sometimes associated with the supposed König, was mentioned in some German records as an accomplished marksman. Though details are scarce, the problem for German snipers in Stalingrad was not lack of skill, but lack of numbers and lack of strategic position. The Soviets held most of the ruins. They had intimate knowledge of the terrain. They had the advantage of fighting from defensive positions while the Germans tried to advance through kill zones. Moreover, Soviet snipers had something German snipers didn't. They were fighting for their homeland, for their city, for their survival. That desperation created a kind of reckless courage that German soldiers, fighting in a foreign land for increasingly questionable objectives, couldn't match. This psychological edge was critical. Zaitsev and his fellow snipers weren't just defending military positions. They were defending what remained of their homes, their families, their nation. That gave them an intensity of purpose that transcended normal military motivation. By November 1942, when Zaitsev's duel allegedly occurred, the battle had reached a stalemate. The Germans controlled most of the city, but couldn't eliminate the last Soviet pockets of resistance. The Soviets held narrow strips along the Volga and a few key buildings, but couldn't push the Germans back. Both sides were exhausted, starving, frozen, dying of wounds and disease as much as combat. In this environment, morale became crucial. Anything that could give soldiers hope, that could make them believe victory was possible, was valuable beyond measure. Zaitsev's duel, real or embellished, provided that hope. The story spread through Soviet minds. Their champion had defeated Germany's best. The sniper sent to kill him had been killed instead. It didn't matter that the war would continue for months. It didn't matter that thousands more would die. In that moment, the story gave Soviet soldiers something to believe in, and belief in war can be as powerful as ammunition. The German side experienced the opposite effect. If their best marksman could be killed by a Soviet sniper, what did that say about German superiority? What did it say about the invincibility they'd been promised? These small psychological victories accumulated. They chipped away at German confidence while building Soviet resolve. And in a battle as close and brutal as Stalingrad, where the margin between victory and defeat was measured in meters and morale, these intangibles mattered enormously. There's another dimension to the Zaitsev story that deserves examination. The role of propaganda, not just in creating heroes, but in shaping how wars are remembered. The Soviet Union was a propaganda state. Information was controlled, narratives were crafted, and heroes were manufactured to serve political purposes. This doesn't mean those heroes weren't real or didn't perform heroic acts. It means their stories were often simplified, dramatized, and deployed strategically. Zaitsev's story fit perfectly into Soviet propaganda needs. A humble worker turned soldier, a man of the people who became a master of his craft through dedication and natural talent. A hero who embodied Soviet values while killing fascists efficiently. The newspaper articles about Zaitsev, the photographs distributed throughout Soviet lines, the accounts of his kills, all of this served a purpose beyond simply reporting facts. It was designed to inspire, to create a mythology that would motivate other soldiers. This doesn't make Zaitsev's achievements false. His confirmed kill count stands in military records. His contributions to Soviet sniper tactics are documented. His survival and continued service throughout the war are fact, but it does mean that every aspect of his story was filtered through the lens of propaganda. Details that didn't fit the narrative may have been omitted. Events that served the message may have been emphasized or embellished. The duel with König is the perfect example. a German master marksman sent to kill the Soviet champion. Days of stalking and waiting. A climactic confrontation. The Soviet hero triumphant. It's a perfect narrative. Almost too perfect. Which is why historians remain skeptical, even while acknowledging that something happened. Some extended engagement between Zaitsev and a skilled German opponent likely occurred. The rest, the specific details, the dramatics, the certainty may be the product of storytelling as much as reporting. But again, does this diminish the story? Or does it simply contextualize it? War produces myths. Always has. From Achilles to Audie Murphy, from the 300 Spartans to the Easy Company. Warfare creates narratives that transcend mere fact. These myths serve functions. They inspire courage. They provide examples to emulate. They give meaning to suffering and death. They help societies process trauma and loss. The myth of Vasily Zaitsev and his duel with Erwin is one such story. It may not be perfectly accurate in every detail, but it's true in the ways that matter most. True to the experience of soldiers in Stalingrad. True to the desperate, intimate nature of urban combat. True to the importance of individual skill and courage even in mass warfare. And true to the reality that in war, stories matter as much as bullets. After the war, both the Soviet Union and later Russia continued to celebrate Zaitsev. Statues were erected. Schools were named after him. His memoir became required reading in military academies. Veterans who served in Stalingrad were asked about him in interviews. Most spoke with respect, even reverence. Some had met him. Others had only heard stories, but all recognized his name. Interestingly, German veterans who fought in Stalingrad rarely mentioned him. This could be because they genuinely didn't know who had been killing their comrades. Snipers are, by nature, anonymous killers. Or it could be because after the war, discussing the effective Soviet soldiers who had defeated them was painful and best avoided. One German veteran, interviewed in the 1980s, was asked about Zaitsev. His response was telling. We knew there were good snipers. We didn't know their names. We just tried not to get shot. This pragmatic answer perhaps captures the reality better than any dramatic narrative. For the soldiers on the ground, Zaitsev wasn't a legend. He was just another threat in a city full of threats. Another way to die among countless ways to die. The legend came later, built by survivors, journalists, propagandists, and historians. Built from fragments of truth and shaped by the needs of memory. In recent years, Russian military units have explicitly adopted Zaitsev's legacy. Sniper training emphasizes his techniques. His patience and field craft are held up as ideals. Modern Russian snipers study his tactics and methods. During the conflicts in Chechnya, Russian snipers operating in urban environments cited Zaitsev as an inspiration. The parallels to Stalingrad urban warfare, close quarters combat, the importance of patience and concealment made. His example relevant decades later, the 2022. Conflict in Ukraine has seen both Russian and Ukrainian snipers invoke the legacy of World War II marksmen. Stalingrad has been referenced by both sides as an example of urban defense and the importance of individual soldiers in modern warfare. This continued relevance speaks to something important. The specifics of technology change. Modern sniper rifles are far superior to the Mosin Nagant Zaitsev. Used, but the fundamentals of the craft remain: constant patience, discipline, understanding of human behavior, the ability to remain motionless for hours, the judgment to take a shot or to wait for a better opportunity. These qualities transcend era and equipment. They're as relevant now as they were in 1942, and that's why Zaitsev's story continues to be taught and studied. But there's something else worth considering, something that gets lost in discussions of tactics and kill counts and historical accuracy: the human cost, the reality of what it means to kill another person, and to do so repeatedly, methodically, over months of warfare. Snipers operate differently than infantry soldiers. An infantryman in the heat of battle, adrenaline surging, firing at enemies who are also firing at him, experiences killing in the context of immediate survival and chaos. A sniper is different. A sniper watches his target, studies him, sees him as an individual human being, sees him eating, smoking, talking with comrades, and then deliberately, carefully kills him. This intimate violence, repeated day after day, exacts a psychological toll. Many snipers, even successful ones, struggle with what they've done after the war ends. Zaitsev wrote about this in his memoir. Not extensively, Soviet-era publications discourage such introspection, but in small moments. He described watching a young German soldier, barely more than a boy, through his scope, seeing the fear in his face, and killing him anyway, because that was the war. He described the weight of knowing that 225 human beings had died because he had pulled a trigger, that 225 families had received notices that their sons or husbands or fathers would never return. He didn't dwell on it. He justified it as necessary. They were the enemy. This was war. It had to be done, but the fact that he mentioned it at all suggests it affected him, that the killing stayed with him even decades later. Other snipers have been more explicit about the psychological burden. Finnish sniper Simo Heie, credited with over 500 kills during the Winter War, rarely spoke about his experiences after the war. When asked how he felt about killing so many men, he reportedly said, "I did what I was told to do, as well as I could." American sniper Carlos Hathcock, who served in Vietnam, described the difficulty of returning to normal life after killing 93 confirmed enemy soldiers at close observation. The intimacy of sniper work, he said, was harder to process than conventional combat. Zaitsev lived with his memories for nearly 50 years after Stalingrad. He worked in a factory. He raised children. He lived a normal Soviet life, but he never stopped being the sniper from Stalingrad. It defined him, and one has to wonder what that meant in the quiet moments, in the middle of the night when memory doesn't sleep. When the faces come back, this is the part of the story that's rarely told. The human cost not just of being shot, but of being the one who shoots. The burden carried by those who kill efficiently and live to old age. It doesn't make them villains. They were soldiers doing their duty in an existential war, but it does make them human, complicated, more than just the heroes of propaganda or the subject of historical fascination. Vasily. Zaitsev was a man who killed 225 people. That made him a hero to his country and a legend to history. But it also made him someone who lived the rest of his life knowing what he had done and who he had been, That complexity is worth remembering, because sanitizing war, turning it into simple narratives of good and evil, heroes and villains, does a disservice to everyone who experienced it. The truth is messier, more painful, more human, and that truth deserves to be acknowledged, even as we tell the stories that make war comprehensible and meaningful. In the ruins of Stalingrad, Vasily Zaitsev became a legend, but he also became a man who would carry Stalingrad with him for the rest of his life. Both truths matter. Both deserve to be told. The deadliest sniper duel of World War II. A story of patience and skill, of propaganda and truth, of individual courage in mass warfare, of legend and reality intertwined so completely that separating them becomes impossible. This was Stalingrad. This was 1942. This was Vasily Zaitsev. And this is how we remember, with all the complexity and contradiction that memory demands.